Good morning, everyone. People in the back, this is the first keynote of the day. Please feel free to come a little bit closer. Don't be shy. We got with us today Reynolds from Imagine Dragons and a new game studio that they're building. We got Kenneth Ye from CAA, runs strategic development over there, and Paul Cross from Netflix, who has the creative direction on the game side. Great to have you all with us today. And let's kick it off with Mac. You've had tremendous success in music. The Imagine Dragons are probably the games rock band, if you will, without having a too specific style. You've done kind of the first major collaboration with Riot Games. That's been fantastic. Always gives me personally goosebumps when I hear Warriors. How are you thinking about the journey creating authentic mass audience products with games, and how do you think you want to connect music and games going forward?
Thanks, Jasper. First off, we have to acknowledge that walkout music, because I made a joke backstage. I was like, "Do they have my walkout music queued up?" And I was just making a joke, and then that was a little embarrassing. But thanks for having us. I'm here with much more qualified people than myself, so grateful to be here on the stage. I was thinking when I was back here, I've been managing Imagine Dragons for 15 years now, so it's been a kind of a long and winding journey. And it looks probably maybe for the outside like it was a very quick one, but we were slogging it out pretty poor for a few years. I recently dug up an email. I was looking through some old emails from the start of the band, and I found one where I convinced the guys that we had to play this Battle of the Bands because we could, quote, walk away with a cool $200. And we did play it, by the way. We got our $200. But it's been a journey since then. And for Dan and I in the band, gaming has been a huge part of our life. We grew up, I'm aging myself here, but we grew up around the Commodore 64 and huddled around our PC playing Sierra games and LucasArts and Delphine and all these studios that had such a huge impact on our life. We've always thought gaming is magical, right? Because it combines so many interesting platforms into one, right? You have the medium of, art, visual art, you have music, you have sound, you have storytelling, it's interactive, all these other things. So with the band, we took advantage of every opportunity we could have to collaborate in gaming. And so, 10 years ago, we put together a streaming rig, and we got a custom guitar case, and we took it out on the road with us, and we did Twitch streaming while we were touring, and we've got to collaborate with, like you mentioned, Riot Games and Bethesda more recently, and Nintendo, and those were really, really magical moments for us, and really eye-opening for me. And then I'm going to stop talking here because I want to hear from these other folks. But really eye-opening for me because it showed me that relationship between gaming and music is still very young and not as established in the same way that music and TV and film are. There's a lot of understanding and expectation gaps that we had to work through. So anyway, very, very excited to be here and hopefully talk a little bit more about this stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Mac. Paul, you've worked on a lot of games before joining Netflix, like The Sims, lots of real brands in there, racing games, lots of real cars in there. How kind of has this informed you? All right. Queuing it up for Paul again.
I think that's his music, right?
So how has this informed you when you're thinking about working with external games at Netflix? Any war stories? What are you most excited about? Maybe what are people missing? What are the common pitfalls?
Well, I'll have to be careful on the war stories. So I think the thing that's been fascinating over the years is when we're working on Burnout, and people would say, can you put real cars in the game? But the moment you put licensed cars in the game, you wouldn't be able to smash them up in the same way. And if any of you know that game, it's all about ripping those cars to shreds. So you don't want to put real cars in and move away from the emotional promise. And then when you got to The Sims, which is all about relationships and living the lives of little people, then there was a Star Wars pack. And of course, you can't date Kylo Ren and Rey and these folks. So that, again, put these kind of constraints that move the game away from the emotional promise, the reason that players are going to be there. And it's always really important for us to remember that the players don't care about your brand restrictions. They just want to have fun in that world. So when we're bringing these different brands in or different IPs in and connecting them, I think it's really vital for us to actually make sure that they align to that emotional promise, that they're going to be complementary and not create that friction and undermine why the player came in the first place.
Makes a ton of sense. And when some of the studios potentially in the audience today think about, working with Netflix, when they come through your scrutiny, what should they be aware of?
Sorry, you have to...
So when studios want to work with Netflix, right, when you look at them, what are you looking for? What are kind of maybe things that people are pitching that are just generally off, that we as VCs might give them as advice to never put that in your deck?
Okay, tough question right in front of a crowd. So I think when we're looking at pitches, we're trying to understand, first of all, is it clear what this game is? Who is it for? Why are they going to care? Because a lot of times people come and they talk about their incredible game mechanics, but people aren't buying game mechanics. That's not what they're buying. They're buying an experience. So we want to know who is the game for and how are they going to feel when they play it? Because then we can assess and see if that's true or not. Is that going to line up? I think with Netflix as well, we have this huge established audience. So we're talking about things that, like, how do we line up to that audience in a way that makes real sense? So when we put a game on like Scriptic, there we go, we know that's crime stories. We have a huge crime viewership. So that starts to line up and make sense, and we see that reaction in our audience.
Amazing. Kenny, CAA has a very long-standing history working with brands, IPs, major content, interactive experience heavyweights. You're working with a lot of small startups at the same time, all the way to some of the biggest IP holders. How should founders think about building IP value in their own company or partnering with external IPs to ultimately, drive value, perhaps at different stages in their company cycle?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question around when IP becomes something that is transferable, right? I think one of the most critical things that we've seen and what's so important, at least in Hollywood, is this idea of building a transmedia behemoth. Everybody wants to do it, and it is the goal and objective of a lot of these properties. But I think what we've realized very early on with working with these groups is that it really comes down to building with intention category by category. So what happens, or something that we've seen quite often, is as you try and overextend, right? You're thinking about games, you're thinking about film, you're thinking about TV, comics, merchandising, etc. Every single one of those categories has a different margin profile, has a slightly different preference in terms of fan base, and while you might start with one area, it's really important to sort of master one before moving to the next, right? Building strategically in tandem is important, but at certain phases of your development, you have to think about, well, what is it that my fan base is looking for now and in this category? And I think that's actually what brings us to, in some cases, make partnerships to say, hey, you should bring in, license some traditional IP from Netflix and have a tie-in from here or there. Or, hey, maybe right now it's about sticking to your core, what you're building over time. Do that well first, and then we can have the conversation about migrating.
Makes a ton of sense. So, transmedia, to stay on that topic, it's been very hot for a while now. People are seeing Arcane, and they're like, oh, I want to do that too. We have Season 2 coming up very soon. Fallout was out there kind of leading the way. What do you think makes a title or a game, if we start there instead of the behemoth right away, what makes it primed for transmedia success? And when and how do you think some of the emerging companies, whether it's on the game studio side or more on the interactive film drama side, perhaps like Scriptic, how should they think about leveraging established partners like you guys?
Maybe just one quick note. I mean, I love those examples, actually, of Arcane and Fallout because it illustrates a really interesting thing, which is different facets of IP can lead to those transmedia opportunities. And in the case of both of these IPs, they really got the assignment, right? They first created a world or an IP that people care about, but then they understood what their audience was attaching to, right? So Fallout, arguably, you have this amazing setting and world, and they really doubled down on that, right? When they branched out, and in Arcane, like League of Legends, it was really about the characters and about their relationships, and they did such an insightful job, I think, of diving in on those characters and extrapolating it, making it meaningful. And so, you have to first create something that people care about, which I think is what Kenny was saying, right? And then I think you have to also understand why they care and what they care about and really lean in there, because you can fall on your face otherwise if you don't understand that. And I think in the success stories you do see that, where they're like, hey, this is how people are attaching, this is where we're going to kind of double down.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I think touching on is people are responding to the clarity in the characters, the clarity in the world, and it's stuff that feels very familiar to them. Like, even though Arcane is this very imaginative experience, it still feels like real people. And you're still connecting with them in that normal, like, drama relationships kind of way, which again, we see time and time again being successful. Whereas when we move over to the cyberpunks, we start to go, okay, now it's moving to more of that imaginary, futuristic space. And you see that still have to lean back on making sure that the individuals involved are meaningful and they can be connected with.
I might go a little off kilter here, where I'd say I think any category, any type of game does have the potential to be transmedia and migrate. The nuance here is about how you find those opportunities and the timing, right? So much of it, and I think one thing we've realized very quickly is you can't be a heat seeker in that space. You have to be really, really careful of identifying the right partners who truly believe and love the work at its original influence. If it's in the game space, what does it mean for that fan base when it's in the game space? If I'm trying to move it to TV, right? What adaptations, what sort of changes do I need to make? What additions can I make so that it's not just about porting the game audience over, it's about extending the audience for TV. So, you take an example like The Last of Us with Craig Mazin and others, like what they did is they took, of course, a great storyline that existed within the game, but they expanded it specifically to say, what are the stories that couldn't really be told in a game format, but could be told in a TV format, right? I think a lot of it comes into, when you see major successes of any sort of IP translation, it does come with that intentionality and time. Not a games example, but Barbie has been around for 65 years. We at CAA, in some way, shape, or form, we're talking about a movie, I think since 2009. It's not until, just a handful of years ago that they finally found the right director, the right stars, the right people to say, this is where Barbie can actually be a true live-action film that is differentiated and meeting the fans where they want to be. It takes a lot of that intentionality, and look, you can make a Tetris movie, it can totally happen. It's not a bad one. So, I think there's an opportunity as you think about any sort of IP, as long as you approach it in that way, there's something about being transmedia that is possible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, Barbie movie is a very interesting one, and then you get emergent behavior like the Barbenheimer all of a sudden, right? But also it hits an interesting cultural moment when it's kind of the nostalgia, right? The right people are at the right age that they grew up with that toy at a certain time. If they tried to do it 10 years sooner, maybe it wouldn't have hit that well. Maybe if they did it 5 years later, same thing. So creating something culturally relevant that is authentic to the IP or the brand is the crucial one that we take away here, I'd say. So now we're in an unprecedented time of the highest kind of virtual, real-life crossover touch points for IPs, brands, content. When you're thinking about more distribution platforms than ever, more forms of content than ever, how's kind of the creative process to actually bring that to life, to start that, to make that decision, hey, we should, do something with Barbie, we should do something with our game IP. How does that come together, and how do you think it's continuing to change as we're looking to the next years?
I guess I was nominated. So creative process-wise, I think it goes back to understanding the essence of the IP. More and more wanting to make sure that the feelings that were evoked in the original material can continue into whatever medium you're expressing it in, whether it be music or film or TV. Because I think so much of the time we get caught, mentioned earlier, get caught in the mechanics of things and say, oh, we're going to make a game of so-and-so. And we make these cool mechanics, but forget to actually carry through the way you felt at the time. I remember when I was a kid and watching the Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. I don't know if any of you saw that back in the day. And when I left the cinema with my friends, everyone was kicking and punching each other. They wanted to carry those feelings on. And I was thinking, okay, well, that's the game they want to play right now. It's obviously a nice, easy example. But if you're watching Too Hot to Handle and you want to carry on those feelings, different experience that you're going to want. So I think it's really important for us to continue to identify what's at the core, what's the essence, what are those emotional expectations, and then see those through into the other mediums.
I'll just point out, I think one of the challenges is a lot of times the people who have the reins of the IP are not the same generation as the people who are going to consume their transmedia opportunities. And that can be really challenging because it's changing so fast. You're always trying to figure out where people are and how to meet them. And, it's still like great stories and characters and more, like that's still the heart of it. But like people are consuming in different ways, whether it's webtoons where people are scrolling vertically on their phone now and it's easier for them to kind of attach to it. But it's a challenge to cut through and to find, for example, there's 120,000 new songs being created every day right now, being released every day.
That's nuts.
It's terrible, but it's also great. It's like, and that barrier to entry for creating content just keeps lowering, and it's going to get there for games, and get there for everything. And so, you really have to lean in on your creativity when it comes to creating those cultural moments that cut through. Again, taking music again, radio, it used to be you have a great song, you can get it on radio, you will have a hit. And then it was like, nope, no more, now it's playlisting. You get a great playlist, you got a hit. Nope. Then it was like TikTok, and then nobody knew how to do the algorithm. And so, you were constantly chasing this, but at the end of the day, you're trying to find a way to create a cultural moment around your IP. And I just basically posed a question instead of an answer, so that was really unhelpful. Sorry, now I just realized.
I think everything you said, both of you, is exactly right in terms of what we've been seeing on the talent agency side, right? One thing that we've seen in particular when you talk about new distribution systems, new social media, all of these different things that can impact and build cultural moments has been around the intentionality of the brand and IP you build, right? So I'll give one example, which is that we happen to work with a studio that creates these horror games. Their entire intention is to build around mystique, right? How do I build up the wonder, the conspiracy behind the game, behind, volume 1 to volume 2 to volume 3? They don't interact with their fan base at all. That's incredibly intentional. They don't post, people are complaining about this, that, whatever else, they don't say a thing. And in that way, I think it's actually incredibly compelling and powerful for them because it actually adds to what they're doing. When they were announcing a new game, they just had, one of those black boxes ticking with numbers and people like trying to decipher it because there's so little engagement. But that's what aligned with their brand. Versus others, it is about, I want radical transparency. I want to build a moment where people are following along with what we're doing on TikTok and other things. I think so much of it does come down to, from the very beginning of what you are building. Like, how are you being intentional of, like, what are the touch points I actually want with our fans? I'm sure you see this in music all the time. Like, where do we actually want to talk to them? Where do we want them to talk to us? And where are the places that, honestly, it's better for us not to play?
So how do you make that decision ultimately? What can people in the audience take away if they say, okay, we want to try to expand our IP through this medium? Maybe it's even something like, hey, we're doing a beta announcement, we're launching a trailer, or we'll work with this amazing artist and music group to try and promote this or do some song integration or something like that. How do people kind of go through the process to make the right choices for their IP?
So one small thing, which is authenticity. Especially in gaming, it's like the beginning and end, right? And this goes to what you were saying, Kenny, about understanding your brand and being loyal to it. You can get the biggest collaboration name ever, and if it doesn't resonate with your community, it's going to flop. And so, That's something we tried to always keep a careful eye on with us, with the Dragons, and maybe we did it right sometimes and wrong sometimes, but it had to be something that was real for us. If we were going to collaborate on a song, like the guys have to play the game, they have to be a part of that community and make sure that people understand that they're a part of that community too. But anyway, authenticity is one facet. I'm sure Kenny's got more in Paul.
So we were talking earlier about Rocksmith and talking about the fact when we had Imagine Dragons songs in the game. It's a game where you basically feel like a rock star playing with a real guitar. And of course, a lot of reaction of the sort of hardcore audience were, oh, Imagine Dragons, that's pop music. And we're going, yeah, that's short for popular. So it's kind of good. And we see that in the response. It's very dangerous to just listen to what you're hearing on the internet. It's like the don't read the comments aspect. You may be capturing a portion of the audience, but it probably doesn't represent the broad swath of people you're trying to reach. So really trying to understand what their needs are, what they're actually leaning into from whether it's behavioral data or deeper consumer insights rather than Reddit is, I think, super important. So then you can find these great winning moments that may not have lined up with the core community.
That's the most perfect Netflix answer I can imagine. I mean, you guys are so data-driven, right? I think that is exactly what we encourage the studios that we work with to do as well, which is, look, it is it's perfect, I'm sitting between you guys. It's the authenticity part first, and then it's thinking about what are those externalities that are acting within that vertical you're looking at. So if it is TV, if we're thinking about an adaptation, when we take it out to writers, producers, directors, to talk about linear adaptation, we don't just talk about this is the fan base of this one IP in game. We talk about, well, what else is working out there in market, right? What are other writers excited about? What are people watching? What are people consuming? Because it does start from knowing your IP in and out, right? Establishing where you want your brand presence. But part of it comes down to, well, what is the market demanding? What are the broader fans wanting? Because I really believe it comes back to that principle of, like, you are building, let's say within video games, you build up an incredible fan base within that space. You want to move them to other categories, but when you move them to other categories, it's about re-expanding your width, right? It's about thinking, how do I make this property something that was great for games, but now is great for TV by itself? And that's so much of what we spend our time trying to think through. And I think, that's what it is. It's that authenticity meets the market outlook piece that is really what's been working so far.
So Mac, you had a lot of great hits that still don't have a 100%, Imagine Dragons style. You maybe have your brother Dan's voice that is the, permeating thing through, but a lot of songs are in such different styles. How do you continue to stay on top of, what the cultural moment is?
Well, I'll just say with music, they've never chased a cultural moment, I don't think, in terms of songwriting. They were very lucky early on that Dan writes in such a diverse way let me put it this way. Let's make a comparison to, who's the band I'm thinking of right now? The banjo band, not Lumineers. Anyway, I can think of that they were acoustic and then they went electric and everybody went crazy. And someone on the stage is going to realize what I'm talking about. They're British. Mumford & Sons, thank you. And we were very lucky, though, that our tent was so wide from the beginning that people understand they're going to expect anything from us. And the through line is Dan's voice and the fact that he writes all the lyrics and the melodies. And it's got that, core at it. But everything else has been whatever's interesting to him at the time.
So when we're trying to give something to the audience about where might be, the zeitgeist headed, what are some cultural pieces, some behavioral patterns that are changing today, you say part of it is just in Dan's gut and creative genius to continue to hit it right. What are perhaps some of the things on, if you try to put a method to the madness, what would you say can people learn from it?
I'm going to give a very unsexy answer here, but I think back in the history of Dragons in our first few years where we had labels come and go. Like we had the same labels that passed on us came back later and we got signed. And we kept our head down and our philosophy was always you focus on what you can control. And what you can control is your relationship with the community and their relationship with each other. That is up to you and your art that you're creating. And I think it's similar for gaming. And we looked at it like firewood. Every fan was another piece of firewood, more points of entry for the spark, more possibility for burning long. And by focusing on that and kind of forgetting about the rest, it was very empowering. And for us, eventually, you can't always control where those cultural moments come, where something takes off, especially today, right? Like, good luck trying to be viral on TikTok, right? Like, when people say, oh, I created a viral video that they haven't put out yet, I just, you kind of chuckle. And so, yeah, we focused on that very early on, and that understanding that core base and super serving them has been what we've tried to do since the beginning. And I think that translates to a lot of IP. It's really about building an authentic relationship, even if that relationship's based on mystique, as you've said, that could be a part of it, and understanding it and trying to foster it.
Fantastic. Do you guys have any answers to the question?
Predicting the future of cultural zeitgeist moments?
Yeah.
Well, so I got Oasis tickets this morning, so I'm very excited about that. And so putting that through the lens of that question, I think it goes back to looking back through history and thinking about how old we were when they were big, right? So I go, musical tastes, a lot of your entertainment tastes start to get locked in when you're in that sort of mid-teen age kind of area. So some 30 years later, as we hit our midlife, not crisis, just midlife, we're getting excited about it again. We're thinking about our youths. We're having those moments. So when we think about the different audiences we're trying to hit, if you're aiming for folks like me, capturing those nostalgic moments is a big deal. But then thinking, well, what's fresh about it? So is that getting the band back together in that case, or is it putting this new twist on it? Is it like what are you bringing that's new to the party that makes it feel like something you already know and love and can trust, but now has that 10 degrees of innovation that's actually going to re-spark it? I think that's something I'm always wondering about, like, what can we do there? How do we get there? So the answer is more, I think about it in those terms. What are people cycling through? How do we catch those next set of waves rather than having a perfect, it's this? Because obviously if I shared that, then everyone will be doing it because it's easy, right?
I mean, I can't help but agree. I think you can just look at a lot of the recent successes of, something like Black Myth Wukong, right? Everybody's been talking about it. I mean, that entire storyline, everything is stuff that, of course, majority of its sales are in China. That entire storyline is something that everybody grew up with. But it's that principle that you just said of working off of nostalgia, working off of what exists and has been cultural trends, and bringing it back and iterating. And I think actually that's a lot of what's compelling about the most popular content that we're seeing today. Is it's not necessarily a completely new formula. It is a twist on the existing, and that piece of innovation, that thinking around, how do I take something that people want and are comfortable with, but really just push it a little bit further, right? That's been a lot of what we've been finding as sort of, the most critical part of creating something substantial. We're going to go back to Barbie again, but incredible film, but in particular because it went through so many iterations. The storyline was completely different in multiple different periods. There was different writers, different directors, different actors. It really took understanding what is the cultural moment today, what is the nostalgia you feel for the IP, and how do I enhance it? How do I be a little bit meta about it? How do I actually bring it into the modern day era that made it the success that it is? And I think that's true across category.
So if you're looking at your products, this is the last one, what are you most excited about in how you're bringing kind of the transmedia magic to life?
Well, yeah, we have a kind of a small startup studio, right? And this is a very relevant conversation for us today because, limited resources, trying to cut through, how do you do that? And I don't know the answers, but this is, I think we've done a lot of kind of looking back on IP questions today. This is like a looking forward when you're creating a new IP. So for us, it's kind of two things we're focused on, which is, number one, if you're thinking about transmedia opportunities after you've created your IP, it's probably too late, right? Like, as you're building with your community, they need to feel like you care about the world you're building and that it matters to you. and it has to matter to them, right? And so we're trying to plant those seeds very early and think about those hooks and giving people discoverability, because I think, and that's one of the things that's kind of big, and so in the game we're making, there's a lot of hidden things that are not spoon-fed to you, and you can get ahead of the storyline if you're smart and you're exploratory and you're sharing theories and clues with other people. So treating people like they're smart, showing them you care about the IP, and then hopefully being able to lean on the community to help you see where that story goes, right? That's the one. We're all afraid, well, I don't know, not everybody, probably some people are ecstatic about how easy it's going to be to create content in the future, but that also means your community can create content easily. And so for us, I'm very excited to see how can the community help expand our story through their fan art, through their storytelling, and leveraging that community and supporting that community to help find those transmedia opportunities is a great way to sidestep that low resource question that a lot of us face when we're trying to cut through.
Yeah, I mean, I think in particular where we sit, right, we are at the intersection of Hollywood and just entertainment broadly. So for us, a lot of it has been the very traditional sense of transmedia, taking Hollywood IP, helping license into a video game. And now what we're starting to see is the interest the other way around, right? We've got writers, directors, producers coming to us and asking about what are the opportunities to option this game or think about this IP. The most important thing, and the thing I'm most excited about, is really getting that sort of collaboration more hand in hand, right? How do you get it so that one hand shakes the other? Building the flywheel. I think even in a lot of the successes that we've had, there's certainly missed opportunities of co-promotion, really working with the fans and thinking about what can amplify this even more and more. I know growing up, I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. One of the best things about every time a movie came out was EA released a game, some of which were incredible, right? The fact that that doesn't happen anymore with some of these really, really major, Hollywood blockbusters feels like a miss. There's opportunities there for us to keep thinking about how this space interacts, and that's what we're going to be spending so much more time on, and that's where it really goes.
Yes to all of that. You talk about bringing those things closer together, and that's going through my mind. I think from a video game point of view, I think the quality of the writing and the stories has not been at the same level as our Netflix film and series in general. There are a few exceptions. But then when you look at those games, there's a lot of filler content. They're trying to expand the length of the game rather than trying to expand the enjoyment of the game. And I think that's something that is going to shift, especially when we think about subscription model for us in particular. I think we need to make sure we have the quality of the writing that they expect, that our members are going to hold them to. They're going to expect film and series quality writing, and they want to get on with it. They don't want to be held in a loop of killing a bunch of bad guys just to make the game longer. So I think those shifts in the mentality and the way that we edit games, like we edit movies, I think is going to need to be brought in pretty hard to say bring us closer together, but allow the writers, allow the people that tell these incredible stories in the other mediums to actually be able to express them well in games.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. We ran slightly over. It was super insightful. And in the audience, please stay seated. We got the next one coming right up here. Jens.